Hi, this is Dr. Gregory Sadler. I'm a professor of philosophy and the president and founder of an educational consulting company called Reason.io, where we put philosophy into practice. I've studied and taught philosophy for over 20 years, and I find that many people run into difficulties reading classic philosophical texts. Sometimes it's the way things are said or how the text is structured. But the concepts themselves are not always that complicated, and that's where I come in. To help students and lifelong learners, I've been producing longer lecture videos and posting them to YouTube. Many viewers say they find them useful. What you're currently watching is part of a new series of shorter videos, each of them focused on one core concept from an important philosophical text. I hope you find it useful as well. William Clifford, in his essay, The Ethics of Belief, is going to begin by posing a case, which you could think of as sort of thought experiment, but it's actually not very far-fetched. It's something that we could easily imagine taking place in our ordinary world and lives in different variations. And he'll follow it up with bringing up another case, both of which are intended us to get thinking about the responsibility that we bear for the beliefs that we take on, entertain, have, and then endorse. So the first case, he says, a ship owner was about to send to sea an immigrant ship. He knew she was old and not over well built at the first. She'd seen many seas and climes and often needed repairs. Doubts had been suggested to him that possibly she was not seaworthy. These doubts preyed upon his mind and made him unhappy. He thought that maybe he ought to have her thoroughly overhauled and refitted, even though this would put him to great expense. Before the ship sailed, however, he succeeded in overcoming these melancholy reflections. He said to himself, she had gone safely through many voyages and weathered so many storms. It was idle to suppose she would not come safely home from this trip also. He would put his trust in Providence, which could hardly fail to protect all these unhappy families that were leaving their fatherland to seek for better times elsewhere. He would dismiss from his mind all ungenerous suspicions about the honesty of builders and contractors. In such ways, he acquired a sincere and comfortable conviction his vessel was thoroughly safe and seaworthy. He watched her departure with a light heart and benevolent wishes for the success of the exiles in their strange new home that was to be. And he got his insurance money when she went down in mid-ocean and told no tales. So a lot of people die, and it's in part attributable to his convincing himself that we don't need to overhaul the ship or check on it or anything along those sorts of lines. So that's one of the cases. And what does Clifford say? What should we say of him? Surely this: he was guilty of the death of those men. Okay, so we'll come back to that in just a moment. Why is he guilty? Let's take a look at the second case. He says, there was once an island in which some of the inhabitants professed a religion teaching neither the doctrine of original sin nor that of eternal punishment, so something different than the Christianity of Clifford's culture. A suspicion got around that the professors of this religion had made use of unfair means to get their doctrines taught to children. They were accused of wresting the laws of their country in such a way as to remove children from the care of their natural and legal guardians, even stealing them away, keeping them concealed from their friends and relations. A number of men formed themselves into a society for the purpose of agitating the public about this matter. They published grave accusations against individual citizens of the highest position and character, and did all in their power to injure these citizens in the exercise of their professions. So great was the noise they made that a commission was appointed to investigate the facts. But after the commission had carefully inquired into all the evidence that could be got, it appeared that the accused were innocent. Not only had they been accused on insufficient evidence, but the evidence of their innocence was such as the agitators might easily have obtained if they'd attempted a fair inquiry.
After these disclosures, the inhabitants of that country looked upon the members of the agitating society not only as persons whose judgment was to be distrusted, but no longer to be called honorable men. So in both cases, we have a belief in place, which really, if an investigation was carried out, and the person judged the results of that investigation fairly and impartially, they wouldn't have been able to hold that belief. So Clifford is going to say, you can in fact hold a belief with sincerity and conviction, much like the ship owner who says, I'm satisfied, right? He's convinced, he's sincere in things, but he's chosen that stance. And the problem, as Clifford is going to say it, is that he has no right to believe with the evidence that was before him. So he's going to frame it in these ways. He'd acquired his belief not by honestly earning it in patient investigation, but in stifling doubts. So that's a problem, right? Putting the doubts to sleep, ignoring them, putting your fingers in your ears and saying, nah. That's one way to do it. What about the other people? He says that although these inhabitants of the island had sincerely and conscientiously believed in the charges that they'd made, they had no right to believe on such evidence as was before them. So these are very similar cases, right? And he's going to go on and say, what if things were a bit different? What if, in the case of the immigrant ship, the ship actually was seaworthy and it reached its destination? Would we say, well, all's well that ends well, no harm done in that case? Clifford says, yes, no harm was done to those people by the ship going down, but something wrong was done by the ship owner who sent them out there without knowing whether they might die or not. Similarly, so he says, let's vary this second case and suppose that a still more accurate investigation proved the accused to have been really guilty. Would this make any difference in the guilt of their accusers? And he says, nope, not at all. Why? Because the question was not whether their belief was true or false, but whether they entertained it on wrong grounds. So they shouldn't have drawn those conclusions. And he's going to say that, the key here is the origin of the belief. Did you actually have good evidence for what it is that you have decided to believe or not? Maybe you didn't have any evidence. Maybe the so-called evidence is, well, that sounds about right, or it feels good, or satisfies my interests, or something along those lines. So Clifford is actually going to, by the very end of this section, he's going to enunciate a sort of general doctrine, which I think has become the most famous one that has been used as a sum up of this, particularly when William James is taking him on. He's going to say that it is wrong always, everywhere, and for anyone to believe anything upon insufficient evidence. And we might say, well, why? Maybe we could come up with a kind of objection to this. So he says, well, let's consider an objection that can be raised. So some people might say in both of these supposed cases, it's not the belief which is judged to be wrong. I mean, the belief is wrong in the sense of being false, but it's not morally wrong to believe it. The morally wrong thing is the action that follows on the belief. So if I'm deceived and I think that my wife is actually possessed by the devil and I must, throw her out the window, it's not my belief that's good or bad, it's either true or false, it's the action that I take on the premise of that belief that is good or bad, depending on whether it's true or false, or perhaps maybe you shouldn't throw possessed people out of the window. That could be a whole separate other inquiry. So he goes on and he says, the ship owner might say, I'm perfectly certain my ship is sound, but I still feel it in my duty to ever examine before trusting the lives of so many people to her. And it might be said to the agitator, however convinced you were of the justice of your cause, you should not have made a public attack until you'd examined the evidence on both sides. And so he says, okay, that I can live with that. That is both right and necessary, right? He says that even when a person's belief is so fixed that they can't think otherwise, they still have a choice with respect to the action. So I think that somebody is terrible and I should do something terrible to them, like the people on the island. I could still forbear from doing something terrible to them, right? That's the right part. And then he says, you can't escape the duty of investigating the ground of the strength of your convictions. Then he also goes on and he says, it's also necessary. Those who can't control their feelings and thoughts need a plain rule dealing with overt acts, but it's not sufficient. Why? Because we inevitably are going to be steered or biased one way or the other. He says it's not possible so as to sever the belief from the action it suggests as to condemn the one without condemning the other. No person holding a strong belief on one side of a question or even wishing to hold a belief on one side can investigate it with such fairness and completeness as if he really were in doubt and unbiased. So the existence of a belief that's not founded on fair inquiry unfits a person for the performance of this necessary duty. What is the necessary duty? To investigate the very beliefs that we're talking about here. So if you got really strong beliefs about topic A, you're probably not going to be able to, do your own research, as the phrase goes in the present, with people who believe in all sorts of beliefs that really they have no good epistemological or moral right to believe. You're not going to be able to do it objectively, we might say. So that's how he addresses that objection. He does also point out another thing that's really quite important. Beliefs, we may talk about them in isolation, but they're really not isolated from each other within our overall psychology, or what you might call the philosophy of action or mind, or the human person. He says that beliefs go on to form part of what he calls the aggregate of beliefs. So it's not as if you just believe one thing and it's in total isolation from everything else. You are a network of beliefs, and he says, a person who truly believes what prompts them to an action, they're already desiring to do that action. And, whatever we have organized and compacted of our beliefs together, each new addition modifies the structure of the whole. No real belief, no thing that we actually do strongly believe, however trifling and fragmentary it may seem, is ever truly insignificant. It prepares us to receive more of its like. So that's, we believe something, we're more likely to believe something else along the same lines or connected to it. It confirms those which resembled it before. We start building habits of mind, and it weakens others, and it gradually lays a stealthy train in our inmost thoughts, which may someday explode into overt action. So he's talking about the working of our subconscious or unconscious mind and the implicit lines of reasoning that we tend to carry out. So beliefs aren't just a matter of we get this one right or wrong. They go into a more general system. So we come back to this duty of inquiry. If we're not entitled, according to Clifford, to believe things on insufficient evidence, then we have a duty to actually inquire and see if we can get some sufficient evidence one way or the other And we should do so without bias if we're capable of that, or this may be more on a continuum than an on-off switch, but we should make an honest, conscientious effort to verify whether the things that we believe are actually true or whether they're false. And if they're false, well, we shouldn't do what follows from that belief, and we certainly shouldn't blind ourselves to their falsity or even whether we have doubts about them.